They thought you were dead. You were not dead. You were somewhere else. The difference between those two things is something you have been trying to explain your whole life. There are no words for it yet in any language. There may never be. You were gone for 3 days. You came back changed, not in the way people change when they have been through something difficult, in the way people change when they have been somewhere real. You are back now, and there is something here that needs your attention. The other stories have been told from other angles. The man who looked at you across the fire on the night you arrived. The woman who watched you from behind the older woman with a face that gave nothing away. The chief who stood over your sleeping body and called your name and heard nothing back. You have been in all of those stories, at the edges, as a presence, and then as an absence. This one begins where you actually were, not dead, not gone in any permanent sense, somewhere that your language does not have a word for, the place between the visible and the invisible that you have been going to since childhood, the place that the smoke and the fire and the long stillness of the ritual opened wider and wider until on that last night it opened completely and you went all the way through. You have been through before, never this deep, never this long. 3 days, they will tell you when you return. 3 days you lay there and did not breathe in any way they could measure, and did not respond to your name, and did not move. They surrounded you with flowers because they did not know what else to do. And then on the 3rd day, your body was gone too, which frightened them more than your stillness had, because stillness they could explain as death, but the absence of a body they could not explain as anything. In this story, you are the shaman. You are coming back. And what you find when you return is going to require everything you have. Time did not pass there. This is the first and most important thing to say about where you were. The thing that makes it different from sleep or unconsciousness or any of the ordinary states of inwardness that everyone experienced. In sleep, time moved. You could feel it passing even without measuring it. The progression from one dream to the next. The sense of hours accumulating. In the other place, there was no accumulation. Everything was simply present simultaneously, the way a landscape was present when you stood in it. All of it there at once, without sequence. The silhouettes were there. You had seen them before in the shallower visits, at the edges, moving without moving. This time, you were fully inside their space, and they were not at the edges. They were everywhere, not crowding, not pressing, as simply present the way the forest was present, filling the available space with their specific quality of existence. They did not speak. They had never spoken. What they did was something that arrived in you the way warmth arrived, from outside, moving inward, a transfer rather than a communication. You received what they showed you without asking for it, and without being able to refuse it, and without being able to describe it afterward in any language. What you received was this: the structure of things, the way everything alive was connected, not metaphorically, but actually, through the same ground, through the same air, through the thread you had been able to feel since childhood, and now felt fully for the first time. The thread was not one thread, it was everything. The living world was one thing that looked like many things. The silhouettes were part of it. You were part of it. The fire and the trees and the sick and the well and the living and what came after living were all part of the same single enormous thing. You held this for what was not time. And then you felt something pulling you back, not from the silhouette's side, from yours. Something in the direction of the body you had left, a faint tug, specific and directional, the way a cord pulled when something moved on the other end of it. Coming back is harder than going. Going happens when you release the hold the ordinary world has on you, when the stillness is deep enough and the smoke has done its work and the body is quiet enough to let what is usually behind the surface come through. Coming back requires effort. The ordinary world must be chosen again, deliberately, because it does not automatically reclaim you. You felt the pull, and you chose toward it. You moved toward the body, and the cold, and the weight, and the limitation of having only one set of eyes. You chose it. Cold first. The cold arrived before anything else, before sight or sound or the full weight of the body, a shock of temperature that meant you were back in the physical world with its specific conditions. Cold, ground, the smell of earth and leaves, and the faint sweetness of something that took you a moment to identify. Flowers. You opened your eyes. The sky above you was the sky, the ordinary sky, gray with pre-dawn, the stars fading at the edges of the dark. Trees around you, the forest floor. You were outside, which meant someone had moved you, which meant time had passed. You sat up slowly. The body was stiff in the way of a body that had been still for a long time. Not days still, you thought at first, but the stiffness was deeper than overnight still. At your arms, when you moved them, had the specific reluctance of muscles that had not been used in longer than a night. The cold in you was not surface cold, but the cold that had gone deep into the bone, the cold that took time to accumulate. You looked at the flowers around you. Someone had gathered late autumn flowers and arranged them carefully, surrounding you with them the way you might surround something precious that you were not certain how to protect. The gesture was so human, so exactly the kind of thing that people did when they did not know what to do, but needed to do something, that it tightened your chest briefly. You sat in the circle of flowers, in the gray pre-dawn, and breathed. The camp was somewhere nearby. You could smell the smoke of it. Not close. They had moved you to the forest edge, perhaps, or You had been in the forest when it happened, and they had come to you there. 3 days, something in you said. You did not know how you knew. You simply knew, the way you knew many things, through the channel that was always open, the information arriving without announcement. 3 days. The body after a deep trance is not the same body that went into it, not in any measurable way. Your weight is the same. Your height is the same. The hands are the same hands. But the way the body inhabits itself is different, less defended somehow, more permeable to the world it is moving through. The other place leaves a quality on you. You have felt it before, after the shorter visits. 3 days of it is something new. You sit in the flowers, and you feel yourself settling back into your own skin, and it takes longer than usual. You walk toward the smoke. The forest in the early morning was the forest you had come to know well. The specific quality of light in this part of it, the sounds, the smell of the particular trees. You move through it with the ease of familiarity, your feet finding the path without needing to look for it. You heard the camp before you saw it. The ordinary sounds of morning, fire being built up, movement, voices. And underneath the ordinary sounds, something else, a quality to the voices that was not the quality of an ordinary morning, something subdued, the specific tone of a group that was still carrying something it had not fully set down. You stopped at the edge of the trees. The camp was there, exactly as you remembered it. The shelter, the fire, the arrangements of living that you had learned in the weeks of being here. The quick-eyed woman near the fire, the old man on his usual side, the children not yet fully awake, and the chief. He was standing at the far edge of the camp, his back to you, looking at something in the distance, or at nothing, the posture of someone who was thinking rather than looking. You had come to know this posture well in the time you had spent here. The way he held his stillness, different from other people's stillness, more deliberate, more chosen. You stood at the edge of the trees and looked at him and felt the pull of the other place still faintly present in you, the residue of 3 days in a world where connection was visible rather than assumed. From here, from this distance, you could feel the weight he was carrying, not the ordinary weight of leadership, something heavier and more specific, settled in him like a stone that had been placed there and had not been moved. You stepped out of the trees. The moment of being seen after being thought dead is not the dramatic thing that stories make it. It is quieter than that. One person sees you and goes very still, and for a moment you are looking at each other across a space that contains everything that happened while you were gone, everything you do not yet know, everything that will need to be said and cannot yet be said, because the saying of it requires time that this moment does not have. You step out of the trees and the chief turns and sees you, and the world stops for the length of a breath. He turned as if he had heard you coming. Perhaps he had. You had learned in the time before the deep trance that he was more perceptive than he let on, that the quality of attention he brought to the world around him was greater than he displayed. He turned and he saw you, and his face did something that faces rarely did. All the careful management of it dropped away completely for one unguarded moment, and what was underneath was so raw and so complicated that you looked away briefly to give it time to reassemble. When you looked back, he had his face again. But the eyes took longer to come back to neutral, and in that additional second, you saw everything. The relief, enormous and genuine. The grief for something that had happened while you were gone, a grief you did not yet have the shape of. At the weight you had felt from the trees, up close now, its specific texture. And underneath all of it, something that you recognized because you had last seen it on a night around a fire. Two people on opposite sides of the flames, the beginning of something that had been very carefully examined. He said your name, not loudly, almost no volume at all. The way you said a thing when you were not entirely certain it was real and did not want to disturb the possibility of it by speaking too firmly. You walked toward him. The quick-eyed woman saw you next and made a sound, a sharp, involuntary sound, and the camp turned toward it, the way camps turn toward unusual sounds, and saw you, and the morning became something very different from what it had been. You had been surrounded by flowers. You had been grieved. As the tribe had absorbed your absence, the way it absorbed everything, by continuing, because continuing was what tribes did. And now you were back, and the continuation had to absorb this too, the unabsence, the return of someone they had already placed in the category of gone. You watched their faces do this, and you felt the specific quality of being someone who has come back from a place no one else has been to. The combination of welcome and uncertainty that always accompanied the return. They told you in pieces, the way people told things that were difficult. The quick-eyed woman first, closest, sitting beside you at the fire with the particular closeness of someone who was not entirely certain you would not disappear again, and was staying near enough to prevent it. She told you about the 3 days, the flowers, the watching. She told it matter-of-factly, with the directness that was her way, not softening it, but not dwelling in it either. Then, on the 3rd morning, you were gone. Not dead gone, just gone. The sleeping place empty, the flowers still there, no sign of how or where. The tribe had looked and found nothing, and had eventually arrived at the explanation that arrived when there was no better one available. The forest had taken you in the way the forest sometimes took things, and not an ending anyone could understand, but an ending. You listened to this, and you thought about the 3 days from your side, the timelessness of it, the other place, doing what it did while your body lay in the forest, being surrounded by flowers. The distance between those two experiences of the same period of time, yours and theirs, was one of the things you had never been able to fully bridge for anyone. Then the quick-eyed woman told you the other thing about the man who had been in the tribe, the large one, good-natured, who had joined some weeks before you. She told it carefully, watching your face as she told it, the way she watched everything. He had gone hunting with the chief. He had not come back. The chief had returned alone. The tribe had searched. They had found nothing. And she said this, and then she was quiet, and the fire crackled between you, and you sat with what she had said. You did not know this man well. He had arrived after you, and you had not had time to know him in any depth before the deep trance took you away. But you had seen him. You had seen the quality of him, the open, undefended goodness of someone who did not yet know to be afraid of being good. You had glanced at him once, near the water, the involuntary look that happens when you encounter something genuinely worth looking at. You had not looked again, but you had seen him. You looked across the fire at the chief. He was not looking at you. He was looking at the fire. The weight you had felt from the trees made more sense now. You spent the first days simply being back. This was necessary in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who had not done it. The deep trance left residue, not the residue of illness or exhaustion, though the body needed rest and you gave it rest. The residue of the other place, the quality it left on perception, the way the world looked slightly different for some days after a deep visit, the connections more visible, the separateness of things less convincing than usual. You walked through the camp and the forest, and you felt the thread that connected everything, not as a concept, but as a sensation, the specific texture of the living world moving through itself. The old man's cough, better than it had been. The quick-eyed woman's knowledge, visible in the way she moved around the tribe's needs, and the children carrying the tribe's future in their uncomplicated aliveness. You felt the chief, not in any way that required explanation. You had always been able to feel the quality of a person's interior when you were in proximity to them, the channel that was open in you, receiving what the other person was carrying, whether they intended to share it or not. With the chief, it was particularly strong, had been since the first night at the fire. The quality of his attention directed at you like something physical. What you felt now was the weight. The weight, and underneath the weight, something that was trying to resolve itself and could not because it lacked information. A question that kept returning and could not be answered because the only person who might have answered it was gone. You watched him lead the tribe through the days, or watched him make decisions with the competence that was his, the efficiency that came from genuinely caring about the outcome. Watched him sit alone, sometimes, at the edge of the camp looking at the forest. Watched the way he watched his wife, without appearing to watch her. There are things you see because you are who you are. Things that other people do not see because they are not built to. You have spent your whole life seeing things that required no explanation beyond the seeing of them. What you were seeing in this camp was one of those things. The shape of it was becoming clear to you the way shapes became clear in the other place, not because you were looking for it, but because it was there and you were built to receive what was there. You watched the chief's wife, not with hostility, not with the specific attention of someone looking for something particular, simply with the open receiving. That was your natural way of being in the world, the channel that was always open, the perception that did not require effort. She was a remarkable person. You had understood this quickly when you first arrived. The quality of intelligence in her, the way she read situations before other people had finished reading them. She was, in the way of people who had built their lives on clear-sighted assessment, more honest with herself than most people managed. And she was hiding something, not from you specifically, from everyone, from herself, partly, in the way that people hid things from themselves when the full looking at those things was too costly. But it was there, at the thing she was not looking at directly, and you could feel its shape, the way you could feel the shape of a thing in the dark by what it displaced around it. She had looked at the man who was gone, not innocently, not in the ordinary way of eyes moving through a space and encountering whatever was there, with the specific quality of attention that meant something, the attention that preceded assessment. That was the beginning of a kind of calculation. You did not know what had happened to that man. The quick-eyed woman's account had been careful and factual and had left certain things unspecified in the way accounts were sometimes careful about certain things. But you knew what had been in the wife's attention, and you knew that the chief had seen it. And you knew what the chief was carrying. Knowledge is not the same as certainty. That you knew things the way you always knew things, through the channel, through the texture of what you received. This was not evidence in the way that evidence was used in ordinary judgment. It was something older and less precise, and in your experience, rarely wrong. What you knew was this: the wife had looked at that man with the attention that preceded wanting. The chief had seen it, and something had happened in the eastern forest that the chief was carrying alone. You went to him at the fire on the 5th night. The tribe had gone to sleep. You had waited for this, the late hour when the camp was quiet and the fire was the only light, and there was no one to observe the quality of a conversation that needed to be what it was going to be. You sat across from him. He looked at you, the careful look, the one that assessed and filed and moved on without revealing what had been filed. You had come to know this look well in the weeks before the trance. It was the look of someone who trusted their own judgment and was applying it continuously. You looked back. You did not begin with what you knew. You began with something else, the thing that had been present since the first night at the fire, at the thing that neither of you had named, because naming it required stepping into a space that both of you had been careful not to step into. I know what you are carrying, you said. His face did not change, but something behind it moved. I have been where people go when they leave, you said. I have been among the ones who are no longer here. I did not see him there. This was not a comfort exactly. You were not offering comfort. You were offering information, the only kind you had, from the only place you had been able to go. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question, not in words, in the look, the specific quality of it, the question that had been living inside him since the eastern forest. You held his look. She looked at him, you said quietly. I saw what was in her when she looked at him. It was real. The fire moved between you. His face was very still, but the weight behind it was different now. You could feel the shift in it, not lighter exactly, but changed in quality, the specific change of something that had been formless, becoming form. An answer that was not a good answer, but was an answer. The truth does not always make things better. Sometimes it only makes them clearer, and clarity is its own kind of gift, even when the thing made clear is painful. You had given him what you had, the information from the only place you could go to get it. What he did with it was his. You had spoken honestly, and the speaking had cost something, and you would carry what it cost. He did not speak for a long time after. You sat with him in the silence and let it be what it was. The fire burned lower. The night continued around you. Somewhere in the forest, an animal moved and was still. You watched his face. The weight was still there. It would not leave quickly, perhaps not ever entirely, but the quality of it was different, and the difference mattered. He had been carrying something with a question inside it, a stone with an uncertain center. Now the center was known. The stone was still heavy, but it was solid now, all the way through. He looked at you, not the careful assessing look, something under that, the look from the first night at the fire, when the careful look had not yet fully assembled itself, when what he was before the role was briefly visible in the firelight. How do you carry it? He said, and not quite a question, the statement of someone thinking out loud about something they had been thinking about for a long time. You understood what he meant, not just the specific thing from the eastern forest, the whole of it, everything that accumulated in a person who led, who decided, who carried the consequences of deciding, the weight that had no place to be set down. You don't set it down, you said. You learn how to carry it without it carrying you. He looked at the fire. I don't know how to do that, he said. I know, you said. That's why I came back. This was not planned. The words arrived the way words sometimes arrived, from a place below planning, true before they were thought. But they were true. You felt the truth of them as you said them, the specific resonance of a thing being said that needed to be said. And he looked at you. You looked back. The fire between you was very small now, the coals giving their last red light, the darkness of the late night pressing in from all sides. In the other place, there was no darkness because everything was equally present. Here, the darkness was real, and the fire was real, and the person across it was real, and the realness of it was its own kind of gift, the gift of being in a world where things had weight and consequence, and the people in it chose to be with each other in it. You reached across the fire. Your hand found his. Not the way you had taken his hand at the oak tree to show him something, simply to be there. The warmth of another person's hand in the cold of the late night, the most ordinary and most irreducible form of presence. He did not pull away. This is not the beginning of something, and it is the continuation of something that began on the first night at the fire, that had been present through everything that came after, that had been there even in the absence, and had waited with the patience that real things had when they were real enough to wait. You are the shaman. You have been to the place between worlds and back. You have seen what connects everything alive, and you are sitting at a dying fire in the cold of a late night with your hand in someone else's hand. And this, precisely this, is what the thread feels like from the inside. The fire went to ash. You stayed. A note on history. The experience described in this story, the deep trance state from which a person does not appear to breathe and cannot be roused, is documented across shamanic traditions worldwide. It is sometimes called the shamanic death, a period of complete withdrawal from ordinary consciousness that can last hours or, in rare accounts, days. What happened to practitioners who entered this state and did not return is not recorded with clarity. Some accounts suggest that the body was kept safe and warm during the trance period. Others suggest that the community waited, uncertain whether the practitioner would return. The 3-day period in this story is drawn from accounts in multiple traditions of extended trance states. The practice of surrounding a person thought to be dead with flowers or other natural materials is found in many prehistoric contexts. Whether this practice represented mourning, a protective gesture, or something else is not fully understood by archaeologists. What is understood is this: the shaman figure in prehistoric communities occupied a unique position outside ordinary social structures while being central to them. The return of such a person after an apparent death would have been experienced by the community as something that required a new category of understanding, something that the ordinary rules did not quite account for. She came back. This is the fact. What she brought back with her from the place she had been is not something that can be measured or verified. It is only something that can be received by those who are open enough to receive it. he was open enough. This, in the end, is the beginning of everything. Good night.